happen? Okay, so Ziaul Haq was appointed as the army chief during the time of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and he was a little dissatisfied with the policies of Bhutto, with the ruling style of Bhutto. So he declared martial law and executed Bhutto due to certain reasons. We did study those reasons in class yesterday. Ziaul Haq's rule was for over 11 years with a lot of important contributions. Some were successful, some failed. Islamization, Hudu ordinances, federal and Sharia courts, Afghan Miracle, all of these are the important contributions of Ziaul Haq. So now, first of all, Hudud ordinances. Hudud ordinances were basically a set of reforms, Islamic reforms, that basically stated punishments for different legal offenses, such as drinking, theft, gambling, adultery. And similarly, there was a zakat ordinance as well, that was also a part of Hudud ordinance, which stated that 2.5% of tax will be given to the poor, to those deserving zakat, and 5.5% tax on agricultural revenue will be given to the poor as part of the Hudud ordinance. All right, so this Hudud ordinance had these three major points. Number one, the punishments for certain legal offenses. Number two, zakat ordinance. And number three, the usher ordinance. Yeah, which is also, all of these ordinances are also part of the Hudud ordinance. So number two, Afghan Miracle. A part of the foreign policy of Zia was to basically stand up against the communist countries. USSR, Russia was communist, and Pakistan was, the ideology of Pakistani government was anti-communist at that time. And so what happened was, in 1979, USSR, the Soviet Union, had invaded Afghanistan. Pakistan, because of the ideology conflict with USSR, stood up in full support to Afghanistan over here. Now, Afghanistan being an anti-communist country, USSR being a communist country, all of the non-communist countries were now supporting Pakistan because Pakistan was supporting Afghanistan. All right. So this was a war of ideology over here. Now, all of those countries that were supporting Pakistan aided Pakistan in terms of military, in terms of funding, finances for the war that was taking place in Afghanistan at that time. And it turned out to be very beneficial for Pakistani government because of the monetary benefits, the benefits that the government got after the support. This is why it's known as the Afghan Miracle. Even USA was supporting Pakistan, and USA was very generously helping Pakistan give shelter to the Afghan refugees. All right. Secondly, Ziaul Haq reversed some of the Bhutto's reforms as well. We studied how Bhutto had nationalized major industries and educational sectors. So what Ziaul Haq did was that he denationalized most of the industries. He felt as if it's important that the industries stay in the private industries remain under the control of private investors, and the government, because obviously he knew the government was not capable enough to manage all of these industries, these nationalized industries. All right, so industries were returned to their previous owners, and they brought in some new investors as well. Okay, this was the policy of denationalization. Then there was another incident that took place known as the Okri camp incident. So what happened was, Okri camp was a dump yard, basically a place where all of these arms and ammunitions were kept that were used against Soviet Union in the Afghan Miracle. There was this accident that took place, an explosion. It caused all of these rockets to explode, and because of that blast, a lot of people were also killed, and this took place near Okri camp, which is a place in Islamabad and Rawalpindi. So you guys can ask your parents about this incident. By the way, anybody living in Islamabad and Rawalpindi, your parents would have experienced this incident in 1988, because most of the people do remember when this incident took place. The rockets were flying all over the Twin Cities. So it was a very, very chaotic time for the government, and it was blamed after it. The government was also blaming it on the army because they felt as if some of the army officials were involved in this incident. We're going to get back to that later. But MRD for now, Movement for Restoration of Democracy. So because see, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's rule was purely democratic. The 73's constitution was introduced a parliamentary form of government, although that constitution was abolished after a few years when Ziaul Haq introduced this military rule, the martial law. Still, some people felt resented. Some political parties wanted democracy to be back because obviously the political parties were basically running the democracy. So Awami National Party, Pakistan People's Party, all of these parties, they basically formed this movement known as the MRD, Movement for Restoration of Democracy, and campaigned against the martial law. All right, so they wanted to remove martial law and restore democracy. This movement proved to be violent in some places, and it wasn't successful in gaining support from a lot of people, because obviously martial laws, I mean, people don't really stand up against martial laws because these rules are generally the policies are excessive. They're framed against people. They're framed to put down all sorts of uprisings and to just put up with a narrative of the army and the government. All right, so guys, is everything clear up till now? Please let me know if there's any question. Okay, so I'm assuming you guys are clear. Okay. 7-mark questions now. So why did Ziaul Haq find it difficult in ruling Pakistan during the late 1980s? So now, obviously, Ziaul Haq was introducing all of these policies, new reforms to stabilize the government, but he had to face certain difficulties as well. There were certain problems that he had to face. For example, number one, when he executed Bhutto, all of the people who supported Bhutto and Pakistan People's Party stood against Ziaul Haq. Sindh was in favor of Bhutto. Sindh till date votes for Pakistan People's Party, favors the policies of Pakistan People's Party. So during that time, Ziaul Haq had to face this resentment from the Sindhis, and they started campaigning from a separate Sindh. All right. And right at that time, because the Afghan Miracle was going on, Afghan refugees were coming to Pakistan. They wanted accommodation. It was a burden on the province. So it became really difficult for the government to manage these internal plus external conflicts at the same time. So the opposition, the dissatisfaction of the people, the hurdles that were created due to the influx of refugees, all of these reasons created difficulty for Zia in governing Pakistan. Guys, secondly, the Ojri camp incident, the weapon dump yard that was exploded in Rawalpindi. A lot of people lost their lives as well. Prime Minister Junejo was dismissed because he basically wanted to set up an inquiry against all of those responsible. So Zia thought as if most of the higher ranked army officials were involved in this incident, so immediately dismissed Junejo, and he also dismissed the National Assembly. This was a cause for the political crisis in Pakistan, because an army general cannot dismiss a prime minister, and they cannot even dismiss National Assembly. So this was where the once again crisis started. You guys remember? Okay, can you guys think of a similar incident that happened in Pakistan before the time of Ziaul Haq, when a governor general dismissed a prime minister and dissolved the assemblies? Can you guys think of an incident? A very famous one. We did study that perhaps. So yeah, anybody? Guys, you can speak up.
Ayub Khan.
Could you maybe elaborate on the incident? Did Ayub Khan remove anybody, or was Ayub Khan removed? Do you guys, any comments?
Ayub Khan removed Iskandar Mirza.
Okay, but that is not relevant to this question here, because we're talking about a governor general removing a prime minister. And yes, I've got the answer.
Was it Ghulam Muhammad?
Yes, it was Ghulam Muhammad. Absolutely. Ghulam Muhammad used this law on the basis of necessities to remove Ali Bogra from the seat of prime minister. because Ali Bogra tried to restrict the powers of Ghulam Muhammad as the Governor General, and the assembly was also removed. The cases were challenged in the federal high courts, and the federal high court ruled in favor of Ghulam Muhammad. That is how political crisis began in the 1950s for Pakistan. Now, on very similar lines, in the 1980s, Ziaul Haq was doing the same thing. He was removing a prime minister, being a military general, and obviously it gave rise to a political crisis in the country. All right, guys. So next, and all of it contributed to the unpopularity of Ziaul Haq at this time. Another reason was the Afghan Miracle. So because Afghan Miracle was somewhat very beneficial for Pakistan, at the same time, because Afghan refugees were coming into Pakistan, they brought all sorts of weapons and drugs, and smuggling was on peak. So Pakistan was facing a highest, according to the statistics, the number of drug addicts in Pakistan was the highest in the 1980s. The street crimes were common, corruption was on peak. So weapons were accessible, they were sold illegally. So yeah, all of this caused the administration to decline, and it proved very difficult for Ziaul Haq to control the situation of the country. Now, why did Ziaul Haq dismiss Prime Minister Junejo? Okay, number one, because of the OG camp incident. We've already studied the details. Junejo wanted to find the ones responsible for this incident. So Ziaul Haq knew that some very high-ranked army officials would have been involved, and an inquiry against those army officials meant an inquiry against Ziaul Haq. So he wanted to protect himself. Just to avoid that inquiry, the investigation against him, he dismissed the prime minister. All right. Number two, another reason was that what Junejo did was he wanted all of the civil governments, the civil wing, free from the control of army. And he also held this party conference, and he invited all of the parties to that conference just to show that civil government still had power and they were not ready to accept the rule of the military. Zia knew that now Junejo was trying to exercise political power. And you see how there's the similarities between Ghulam Muhammad and Ziaul Haq. So it was pretty similar to what Ghulam Muhammad did to Ali Bogra. So just to keep the powers in his hands, Ziaul Haq dismissed Junejo. Then we're going to talk about the all parties conference again, how the leaders of People's Party, when Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was executed, Junejo invited all the even all the parties and People's Party to this all parties conference, because Pakistan People's Party was in conflict with Ziaul Haq's ideology, and they were indirectly, I mean, they were the opponents of the government of Ziaul Haq. This invitation meant as if Junejo tried to somehow convey that he was not satisfied with Ziaul Haq's rule. So yeah, Ziaul Haq thought that it was wise to maybe dismiss the prime minister just to keep the power themselves. All right, guys. So the three reasons to dismiss Junejo were: number one, because of the OG Cam incident, the inquiry against the OG Cam incident; number two, the transfer of power; number three, the all parties conference and the dissatisfaction of Junejo against Ziaul Haq and his ideologies. Any questions? No, okay. All right, so why did Ziaul Haq introduce a series of Islamic reforms? So we were talking about the Islamization policy of Ziaul Haq, the Hudud Ordinance, the Federal Sharia Courts, the Usher Ordinance, and in general the Islamization. So most of the people were not happy on the execution of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. The supporters of Pakistan People's Party and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto were not happy, and it meant that Zia was on this verge of losing power. So just to sustain himself and to make his government purely Islamic, to satisfy the Islamic fractions, he used Islam as a reason to stay in power. All right. This is why these reforms are introduced. Number two, Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan at that time. The Islamization policy was introduced and in support of Afghanistan. because he wanted the support of Muslims from all around the world. They were supporting Afghanistan. They wanted the Afghanis and all the Muslim countries to support Pakistan as well in return. So just to please the Muslim nations, the Muslim leaders from around the world, a set of Islamic reforms were introduced. Number three, Islamization was introduced to counter Bhutto's socialist reforms. Bhutto's ideology was to connect the countries on the basis of these social reforms. Drinking, gambling was allowed in Pakistan. All of this was directly against the ideology of Zia ul Haq. So just to counter the growing socialism in Pakistan, Zia ul Haq introduced a set of Islamic reforms, and he was obviously successful in gaining support from some of the political and most of the religious leaders, religious factions. Okay. And guys, now the 14-mark question. Islamic reforms of Zia were the most important of Zia's domestic policies between 1977 to 1988. We're talking about all of these 11 years in general, and how and what reforms were the most important. You guys will have to write the Islamic reforms on level 3, and you guys will have to make 2 to 3 points for Islamic reforms if you think that Islamic reforms are the most important. And then obviously you'll be making 5 to 6 other points to get full marks in this question. All right. So number one, we're going to be talking about the Islamic reforms. Introduction of Islamiyat, Arabic and Pakistan studies was made compulsory in schools. Teaching of Quran was made compulsory. All right. Number two, Hudud Ordinance. You can talk about all of. We've already talked about Hudud Ordinance in detail. So I just wanted to show that Pakistan was an Islamic country, and we were trying to reduce the crime rate through the Islamic principles. Federal Sharia courts were basically Islamic courts. They were set up to rule on the basis of Islamic laws, to rule against all of these criminal offenses on the basis of the Sharia law. All right. Council of Islamic Ideology was also set up, and it was responsible for giving advice on the legal structure of Pakistan. So they just wanted to make all of these laws in accordance to Islam. All right. So these were the Islamic reforms. Now, there were some other important policies as well. We're shifting levels from level 3 to level 4. Because this answer has already stated 3 points from Islamic reforms on level 3, you can talk about 4 other contributions of Zia ul Haq. Number one, you can talk about the 8th Amendment in the Constitution that was introduced. You can talk about the Afghan Miracle, but I think Afghan Miracle is a foreign policy, and this question is about, just a second. Yeah, so we cannot include some Afghan Miracle because it's a foreign policy. Okay, you can talk about the denationalization policy. You can talk about this civil service setup. All right. So 4 other reasons to get full marks in this question, and because this question has stated 3 reasons for Islamization on level 3, this clearly indicates that according to the candidate, Islamic reforms were the most important of Zia's policies. And you will have to evaluate Islamic reforms as the most important. All right. So yeah, that is it. Guys, is there any question? We're going to be doing an assignment now. Let me know if anything's not clear, because you guys will be on your own now. You'll be doing an assignment on your own. Okay. Any questions? Okay, so I'm guessing everything is clear. So guys, I'm posting these 2 questions on the Google Classroom, a 7-mark question and a 14-mark question. 7-mark question is a class assignment that you need to attempt right now in the next 15 minutes. And 14-mark question is a homework assignment. All right. All the students who are new and have not registered for the classes are here for the first time for the demo lecture can submit your answers in the WhatsApp group. You can submit the pictures or PDF files of your answers in WhatsApp group. And all the students who are already there on the Google Classroom will have to submit your responses on the Classroom portal. All right. Guys, is this clear to all of you? If you're there on the Classroom, please make use of that and submit your assignments over there. If you're not there, you can maybe send your answers to me in the WhatsApp group. That is also okay.